Somewhere in Indianapolis, under the hum of fluorescent lights and the quiet shuffle of paperwork, a woman walked into a bank she had built with her own two hands, and not a soul in that lobby knew who she was. Her name was Danielle Grayson, founder and CEO of Grayson Trust. For over a decade, she'd poured her life into creating something different, a bank meant to serve fairly, treat people right, and never forget who it was built for. It was her legacy. But lately, something had started to gnaw at her, a quiet suspicion. Stories shared over coffee murmured frustrations from trusted friends and offhand comments that lingered a little too long in her mind. They said things didn't always feel right at the branches. Not illegal, not loud, just off. Subtle differences in how folks were treated, depending on how they looked or maybe where they came from. Danielle had always believed in policies training oversight, but she also knew that real change doesn't live on paper. It shows up in moments and choices in how people treat someone they think no one's watching. So today she dressed in a soft gray cardigan jeans and worn-in sneakers. No tailored blazer, no boardroom presence. She wasn't walking in as the boss. She was just Danielle, a regular woman needing to make a simple withdrawal. The branch was one she had personally greenlit just 3 years earlier. She still remembered the ribbon-cutting shaking hands with the branch manager giving that speech about trust and values. But this time there were no cameras, no red ribbon, just the soft chime of the automatic doors as she stepped inside and took a slow breath of air freshener and freshly printed paper. She approached the counter quietly. The teller, young pale, her hair pulled back tight, glanced up without a smile, offered no greeting, and slid a clipboard across the marble surface. Fill this out. Danielle did. Name, account number, withdrawal amount. $5,000, not a fortune, but enough to raise protocol. She handed it back and waited. That's when it started. The teller glanced at the form, then at Danielle's driver's license. Her brow tightened. She looked again longer this time, then stood without a word and walked away, taking the ID with her. Danielle leaned slightly on the counter. She wasn't angry, not yet, but something in the air had shifted. She could feel it like a ripple you can't quite name. She knew this wasn't about paperwork, not really, and something told her this was only the beginning. Danielle stood quietly at the counter, the cool marble pressing against her palms. She could still smell the faint scent of pine-scented cleaner in the air, hear the low murmur of a woman chatting with a teller on the far end of the lobby. Everything around her moved on ordinary and unnoticed, except her. The teller had disappeared behind the frosted glass of the manager's office, taking Danielle's ID with her. No explanation, no update, just silence. Danielle glanced at the wall clock. Nearly 5 minutes had passed. Behind her, a man in a wrinkled suit stood in line, tapping the face of his phone. He had walked in moments after her and had already been greeted with a smile and a quick, "How can I help you today?" No delay, no extra steps. Danielle took a breath, deep and slow. She wasn't just being patient, she was watching, listening, noticing. The glass door finally swung open and the teller returned, but she wasn't alone. Walking beside her was a man in his mid-50s, stocky build, rimless glasses, and a name tag that read Todd Larson. Danielle recognized him at least vaguely from that ribbon-cutting day 3 years ago. He didn't recognize her. Todd approached with the kind of careful smile that people wear when they have already made up their minds. "Afternoon, ma'am," he said politely, standing behind the counter. "I understand you're trying to make a withdrawal." Danielle nodded once. "That's right, $5,000 from my personal account." He glanced briefly at the teller, then down at the ID still in his hand. "Mind if I take a look at your identification?" She didn't move. I already gave it to her. He didn't respond to that. Just held the ID up to the light, slowly flipping it over. "Miss Grayson," he said in a tone that was too polite to be sincere, "is this your first time banking with us?" Danielle felt something tighten in her stomach. The question was posed gently, but the implication was sharp. "I've banked here since this branch opened," she replied, calm but firmer now. Todd gave an exaggerated nod like he was chewing on the information a little too slowly. And you said you were withdrawing $5,000, like I wrote on the form. The lobby hadn't gone silent, but it was quieter now. Conversation slowed, eyes flicked her way. Danielle could feel it, that heavy shift when something subtle becomes noticeable. Todd didn't look at her as he turned the ID over in his fingers again. And what do you do for work, Miss Grayson? Danielle blinked. That question hadn't belonged. Not here, not now. She gave a soft, almost amused laugh. Finance, Todd nodded slowly, still fishing. What kind of finance? She let the pause stretch. Banking. That made him hesitate, only for a second, but it passed. And this is a personal account, correct? Not business, Danielle folded her arms. That's what it says on the form. Another nod, another quiet glance at the teller. Then he laid the ID back down on the counter. I'm afraid he said with the same even tone, we won't be able to process this withdrawal at this time. Danielle blinked. Excuse me, Todd's voice stayed level. We're unable to verify the transaction. She straightened. You have my account number. What exactly needs verifying? We just take security very seriously, he replied. It's a precaution. There it was, that word, security, the blanket term used to explain away things that didn't make sense or things no one wanted to say out loud. Danielle's fingertips curled against the edge of the counter. This isn't about fraud, is it? She asked quietly. Or a banking rule. Todd gave the same practiced smile. We're just following procedure. She leaned in slightly. Then walk me through it. What exactly needs to happen for me to withdraw money from my own account? Todd shifted. Well, we need to confirm some account details. For example, could you tell me the amount of your last deposit? Danielle stared at him. That's not standard. It's just one of our questions, Todd replied. To ensure the account holder is, I don't memorize my deposit amounts. She cut in her voice, still low. But if you pull up my account, you can see every transaction I've made. Todd offered a neutral smile. Of course, but for security reasons, we want the customer to verify the account directly. Danielle's jaw clenched. I gave you my government-issued ID, she said. That's the standard. You'd be surprised, Todd replied, how many fraudulent IDs come through. She took a breath through her nose. I'm not withdrawing millions. It's $5,000. A fraction of what's in that account. Todd shrugged lightly. We're just doing our due diligence, Miss Grayson. Danielle stared at him for a long moment. If I were a man, she said softly, wearing a tailored suit and polished shoes, would you be asking me these questions? A flicker. Just a twitch in his eyes. A shift in posture. It was there and then it was gone. This isn't about appearance, he said quickly. It's about policy. Danielle let out a breathless laugh. Is that right? Todd didn't flinch. Would you be willing to provide another form of verification? Perhaps a utility bill. A second ID. She tilted her head. A utility bill. You want me to prove who I am, to withdraw my own money. It's just Danielle cut him off. Let's do it this way. Pull up my account. He hesitated. You have my name, she continued. You have my ID. Check the file. You'll see I've been banking here since day one. I helped open this branch. I probably signed off on your training materials. Todd didn't speak. She leaned just a little closer, lowering her voice so only he could hear. You might want to double check before you dig this hole any deeper. The teller shifted uneasily behind the counter. Todd's jaw tightened. Danielle waited. And then just when she thought he might reconsider, that he might apologize, step back, do the right thing, he exhaled slowly and said without blinking, I'm sorry, Miss Grayson. Without additional verification, we can't process this withdrawal today. Danielle went still. She wasn't embarrassed. She was furious. Not loud, not explosive, just that deep, steady kind of anger that settles in your chest and doesn't go away. Around her, customers glanced over, pretending not to notice. But the air had changed. Everyone could feel it. And in that moment, Danielle understood one thing with crystal clarity. This wasn't just about a banking policy. It never had been. For a moment, Danielle said nothing. She stood quietly at the counter, her ID still sitting in front of Todd Larson, the branch manager who had just refused to process her withdrawal. The polite mask on his face hadn't slipped, not yet. But something deeper had settled in the room, something uncomfortable, heavy, and hard to ignore. And then Todd made a choice that changed everything. Without a word, he reached under the counter and pressed a small recessed button near the register. Danielle heard the soft buzz it triggered, and a second later, the sound of a door clicking open behind the teller stations. A uniformed security guard stepped into the lobby. Broad-shouldered and expressionless, his hand hovered near the equipment on his belt as he approached. Not running, not aggressive, but with the unmistakable posture of someone prepared to remove a problem. Danielle didn't move. She watched him come closer, watched the glances ripple through the waiting customers like quiet waves. She could feel the shift, the way her presence had just been reframed. She wasn't a customer anymore, she was a situation. She looked at Todd. "You're really doing this?" His answer came smoothly, like it was rehearsed. "We just want to ensure a smooth experience for all our customers." Danielle blinked slowly. "A smooth experience," she echoed. "Is that what this looks like to you?" The guard stopped a few feet away. He kept his voice calm. "Is there a problem here, ma'am?" Danielle turned to him, her chin lifting just slightly. "That depends. Are you here to help me withdraw my own money or to escort me out for asking?" The guard glanced over at Todd, who gave him a short nod. Danielle could see it, a silent signal that said, "She's the problem." She let out a breath. "Wow, so this is what we're doing now." Todd exhaled like he was tired, like he was the one being burdened. "Miss Grayson," he said, "if you'd like to return with additional documentation, we'd be more than happy to assist you." "But right now, no," Danielle said, cutting him off. "Let's not pretend this is about documentation. I watched you greet that man 10 minutes ago. No extra questions, no security. You didn't ask him for anything but his name. So what exactly is different about me?" The room was quiet. The teller stared at her computer screen. The guard shifted slightly, his stance less rigid now. Even the man in line behind Danielle lowered his phone. Todd didn't answer. Danielle leaned a little closer to the counter, her voice low and even. "I wonder what part of me doesn't fit the picture you had in your head." Todd stayed still, too still. Danielle reached slowly into her bag. Instinctively, the security guard's hand twitched toward his belt. Todd stiffened. But Danielle wasn't pulling anything threatening. She pulled out her phone and tapped the record button. "I want to make sure I get this on video," she said, her voice soft but unwavering. "You're refusing to let me access my own money despite valid ID and an active account while other customers aren't being asked for anything extra." Todd's jaw tensed. She turned the phone slightly, making sure the camera caught the guard beside her. "And you were called out here for what exactly?" The guard looked at Todd again, uncertain. "Just following instructions, ma'am." Danielle nodded. "That much is clear." The weight of silence returned heavier this time. No one in the lobby was pretending not to listen anymore. Danielle's calm was louder than shouting. And then Todd made his final mistake. He reached out and picked up her ID. He didn't ask, didn't explain, just snatched it from the counter as if taking back control, as if trying to re-establish the authority he felt slipping through his fingers. That was it. Danielle didn't flinch. She turned her phone slightly, capturing his face, the guard, the teller frozen behind the screen. And then in the gentlest voice you could imagine, she said, "Todd, let me introduce myself properly." He blinked. Danielle reached forward, took her ID from his hand with deliberate calm, and turned it over so her name faced the camera. "You see this?" she said, tapping her finger gently on the card. "This isn't just any customer's ID." She let it sit for a second. You could have heard a pin drop. "You're looking at the founder and CEO of Grayson Trust." A pause, and then silence swallowed the lobby whole. The teller's face went pale. The security guard straightened like he'd been caught mid-step. Customers turned fully now, no longer even pretending to glance away. And Todd, the man who had smiled through every excuse, who had invoked every policy in the book, he went still. His mouth parted slightly, but no words came out. Danielle slipped her ID into her bag. "I built this bank," she said gently but firmly. "I approved the funding for this branch. I signed the paperwork that got you this job, Todd." His hands curled slightly at the edge of the counter. "And today I walked in as just another customer, to see what would happen." She tilted her head. "And now I know." Todd's expression was collapsing. The polite smile gone, the practiced professionalism fading under panic. His eyes darted to the security guard like he wanted a lifeline. Danielle wasn't done. "If I had come in here in a suit and tie, I looked like what you expect a CEO to look like, none of this would have happened." The teller finally looked up, her eyes wide and unblinking. Danielle lifted her phone again. "So tell me, Todd, should I send this footage to corporate now, or do you want to handle this here?" Todd paled. "I'm Miss Grayson. I sincerely apologize. This was a misunderstanding. I can process your withdrawal right away." Danielle gave a tired smile. "Todd, you and I both know it's too late for that." And as she stood there in the lobby of the very bank she built, it was no longer about one withdrawal. It was about something deeper, something she couldn't ignore. Not anymore. Todd Larson stood like a man who'd just been told he'd walked into his own funeral. A minute ago, he was the authority in the room, the gatekeeper, the one who controlled what happened next. Now he was gripping the edge of the counter, his knuckles pale, his confidence drained. The security guard, the one he'd summoned like a silent warning, shifted uncomfortably, no longer standing tall, but caught in some limbo between protocol and common sense. The teller, eyes down, looked as if she wanted to vanish into her chair. And Danielle Grayson, she stood exactly where she had been, steady, calm, in control, not because she raised her voice, but because the truth had finally spoken louder than all their assumptions. She tapped the edge of the counter with her fingertips, slow and deliberate. Her voice was low but crystal clear. "Let me make sure I understand, Todd." He flinched slightly at the sound of his name. "Just a few minutes ago, my ID wasn't good enough. My account history wasn't good enough. You needed more verification, you said." Todd swallowed hard, trying to piece together a reply, but she continued without waiting. "And now that you know who I am, suddenly none of that matters." His mouth opened, then closed. "Miss Grayson," he stammered, "I sincerely regret how this unfolded. I assure you this was never intentional." Danielle cut in, her voice like silk pulled tight. "Is that what you're about to say?" He hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Yes, it wasn't intentional. It was simply a misunderstanding." Danielle let out a quiet, humorless laugh. "Do I look like someone who believes that?" He didn't answer. Couldn't. "You knew exactly what you were doing," she said softly. "You looked at me and decided without reason that I didn't belong. You decided to question everything I handed you. My ID, my account, my right to be here." Todd tried again. "Miss Grayson, that's not what happened." She held up a hand, stopping him cold. Don't say another word unless you're ready to tell the truth." The room was silent except for the faint tapping of her fingernails on the countertop. She turned to the security guard. "You were called to remove me from the premises, weren't you?" He hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "Yes, ma'am, that was my understanding." She nodded. "And now that you know who I am," the guard glanced at Todd, then back at her. His posture relaxed, almost sheepish now. "No, ma'am, that's not necessary." Danielle gave a small nod. "That's what I thought." Then turning back to Todd, she reached into her bag and pulled out a business card. Her thumb pressed the edge as she laid it on the counter in front of him. Not tossed, not thrown, just placed. Intentionally. "Here's what's going to happen," she said. "You're going to call my office. You're going to schedule a meeting with our corporate leadership team, and you're going to explain in detail why this happened today. Todd's hand trembled slightly as he picked up the card. Of course, Miss Grayson, absolutely. Danielle looked at the guard. I appreciate you coming when you were called, but next time I suggest asking whether the situation calls for your presence at all. If a customer isn't being disruptive, the first step shouldn't be intimidation. He nodded. Understood, ma'am. Then her gaze landed on the teller. The young woman jumped slightly. Yes, ma'am. You saw my ID. You had my account information. And you still decided I wasn't worth helping. Why, the teller stammered. I, I was just following protocol, ma'am. Danielle didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Then maybe it's time you ask yourself why that protocol only seems to apply to people like me. The teller swallowed hard and looked down. Danielle took a moment to look around the room at the people watching silently at the employees who had fallen quiet, unsure of how to recover from what had just happened. This, she said softly, was never about a withdrawal. It was about a system of assumptions, of quiet barriers, and of who's given the benefit of the doubt and who isn't. She stepped back from the counter, her heels clicking against the polished floor. No one spoke. No one moved. And just as she reached the door, she turned back one final time. One last thing. Her voice carried not with volume but with clarity. I built this bank to serve people, all people. And if someone like me, the CEO, can be treated this way, I can only imagine what happens to those without the power to speak up. Her eyes moved across the lobby. That ends now. Todd didn't reply. His face was pale. The teller's hands trembled slightly where they rested beside her keyboard. The guard looked down, the weight of his silence hanging on his shoulders. Danielle glanced down at her phone, still recording. She stopped the video and slipped it into her bag. Then she looked at Todd one last time. Corporate will be in touch, she said, her voice quiet but unshakable. And Todd, he looked up. You might want to start looking for a new job. She didn't wait for an answer. She turned and walked out the door. Not rushed, not angry, but resolved. And as the door swung shut behind her, the silence left in her wake said everything that needed to be said. The silence in the lobby lingered long after Danielle stepped away from the counter. Every eye was on her, though no one dared speak. Even the faint sound of the printer in the back office seemed muffled under the weight of what had just been said. Todd Larson still hadn't moved. He stood frozen, Danielle's business card gripped tightly in one hand, as if it were the last thing tethering him to the ground. Just minutes ago, he was speaking with confidence, making demands, setting terms. Now he looked like a man unraveling, pale, uneasy, and far too aware of the consequences ahead. Danielle stopped near the door, then slowly turned to face him again. She wasn't finished. Not yet. Let me ask you something, Todd, she said quietly. A few minutes ago, you told me you needed more proof, a second ID, a utility bill, some form of verification beyond a government-issued license and an account number. He said nothing. But now that you know who I am, now that you've realized the person standing in front of you is the very reason this branch exists, suddenly none of that matters. Todd's throat moved as he swallowed hard. Miss Grayson, I sincerely regret how this unfolded. She took a slow breath. Regret's easy once you've been exposed. No, that's not what I meant. I assure you this wasn't intentional. She finished for him, her tone clipped but calm. Let's not pretend. He lowered his eyes. Danielle stepped a little closer, not to intimidate, but to be clear. You knew what you were doing. From the moment I walked through those doors, you decided I didn't fit. You put every obstacle in front of me, hoping I'd leave quietly, that I'd be embarrassed enough to give up. No, she said firmly. You weren't just following policy. You were following a feeling. A gut instinct shaped by bias, whether you want to admit that or not. Across the room, the security guard stood quietly, his earlier posture gone. Now he looked uncomfortable, as if the uniform on his back weighed more than it had an hour ago. The young teller who'd first received Danielle's ID kept her eyes glued to the screen in front of her, though her hands had long stopped moving. Danielle turned to the guard. You were called over to escort me out. Is that correct? He cleared his throat. Yes, ma'am. That's what I was told. And now that you know who I am? He hesitated. No, ma'am. That won't be necessary. Danielle nodded. It never was. She looked back at Todd. That's what should keep you up tonight, the fact that none of this was necessary. That your assumptions could have cost you your job, your reputation, maybe more. Todd was visibly trembling now. Miss Grayson, I just want to say, I'm sorry. Danielle didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. No, Todd, you're not sorry for what you did. You're sorry you got caught doing it. Behind her, the lobby was quiet. Even the customers who had tried to look busy with their phones had stopped pretending. The atmosphere had changed, no longer tense, just still. Like everyone knew something had cracked open that couldn't be closed again. She looked at the teller. You, she said gently. The woman's head snapped up, startled. Yes, ma'am. You had my ID. You had everything you needed to do your job. And yet you handed me off like a problem to be solved. Why? The teller's eyes glistened. I was just following the usual steps. I didn't mean Danielle held up a hand. Then maybe you need to ask yourself why those usual steps only apply to certain people. Why some folks get the benefit of the doubt and others get the runaround. The teller nodded quickly, unable to speak. Danielle took a final look around the room. This wasn't about a transaction, she said softly. It was about how easily someone can be dismissed. How quietly someone can be pushed aside, made to feel like they don't belong even in a place built to serve them. She didn't say these words for drama. She said them because they were true. And everyone in that branch, employee and customer alike, knew it. I came here today to see what would happen if I walked in as just another customer. No title, no name on the wall, just me. What I got was a reminder that policies don't protect people. People protect people, and when they choose not to, the policies are meaningless. Todd's head hung low. The card still trembled in his hand. Danielle turned and walked slowly to the door once more. Then just before stepping outside, she paused. This, she said without turning around, was the last time something like this happens in my bank. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. It landed like a stone in a still pond. I won't stand by while people are treated differently because of assumptions, bias, or ignorance. That's not the bank I built. And it's not the bank it will become. She placed her hand on the glass door. Real change starts here. And then without another word, Danielle stepped out into the warm Indianapolis afternoon, leaving behind a room that would never forget her, or the quiet, powerful truth she carried with her. The next morning, Danielle Grayson arrived at the corporate offices of Grayson Trust before the sun had fully risen. The skyline outside her window was still wrapped in soft, blue-gray light, but inside the boardroom, her vision was already sharp. She hadn't slept much. The events from the day before played on a loop in her mind, not because of the personal insult, but because of what it revealed. What if she hadn't spoken up? What if she hadn't been the CEO? How many others had been quietly dismissed, questioned, or made to feel like outsiders at her bank? That was the part that stung the most. So at 7:00 a.m. sharp, she called in every senior executive, every regional director, every manager with authority to shape the customer experience across the company. No preamble, no polite small talk. We failed, she told them, standing at the head of the long oak table. And we didn't even know it. Her voice wasn't angry, just steady, the kind that makes people sit up a little straighter in their chairs. She told them what happened, in detail, not sparing anyone from the discomfort of hearing it aloud. She described how she walked into a branch without her title, without her name badge, and how quickly she was treated like she didn't belong. She told them about the questions of denial, the presence of security, and the looks that said more than words ever could. And then she asked a simple question. If this is how we treat the person who built this bank, what are we doing to the people we're supposed to serve? No one spoke. Within an hour, she had launched a top-down review of every single customer service policy, not just what was written on paper, but how it was carried out in real time by real people with real consequences. Todd Larson was terminated before the day was over. The teller who escalated the situation received a formal reprimand and was placed on a performance plan not to punish, but to educate and rebuild. But Danielle didn't stop there. She knew the problem ran deeper than one branch or one bad decision. So she moved quickly with purpose. Mandatory bias and inclusion training was rolled out to every employee from the boardroom to the front desk. Not a generic workshop, not a checkbox. This was real, interactive, uncomfortable when it needed to be. Danielle made sure of that. She also established a new accountability system, a direct channel where customers could report instances of discrimination, even subtle ones, without fear of being ignored. Every complaint would be reviewed by a real person. Every branch manager would be held responsible for creating a safe and respectful environment. She asked her team to do something difficult: to listen. Really listen. Not to defend, not to explain, to believe. And within weeks, something began to shift. Customers, especially those who had once hesitated to speak, started to feel the difference. The tone at the branches grew warmer, more careful, more human. There were still mistakes, of course, but now they were caught faster, addressed openly, and used as lessons instead of liabilities. Some employees pushed back at first. They didn't want to believe they had treated anyone unfairly. They insisted on their good intentions. Danielle listened to them too. She told them what she believed: that most people don't mean harm, but that doesn't mean harm isn't done. Bias doesn't always look like cruelty, she said at a regional meeting. Sometimes it looks like silence, like hesitation, like making someone prove they belong. She paused, looking around the room. I want better than that. And they believed her, not because she shouted or demanded, but because she showed up. She didn't hide behind titles or PR statements. She walked into a branch like any other person. She saw the truth with her own eyes. And then she did something about it, not to protect her image, but to protect her values. One afternoon, a week after the changes began, Danielle received a handwritten letter at her office. It was from a customer, an older Black woman in Indianapolis, who had been banking at Grayson Trust for over 20 years. I don't know what changed, the letter read, but when I came in last week, someone smiled at me. They asked how they could help, and they meant it. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I had to prove anything. I just felt like a person. Thank you. Danielle held the letter in her lap for a long while, not because it made her feel proud, but because it reminded her of what had almost gone unnoticed, of how close they had come to letting something ugly become normal. She stood at her office window, watching the sun stretch over the skyline. The bank she built was still standing, still growing. But now it was evolving because she'd had the courage to face what was broken and to fix it. Real change doesn't come from mission statements or press releases. It doesn't live in a binder on a shelf. It happens in hard conversations, in small corrections, in people deciding that dignity isn't negotiable. Danielle Grayson made that decision. And because of it, so did everyone else. Danielle Grayson never forgot that day, not because she had been humiliated, but because it proved something she'd always known deep down. Policies may be printed on paper, but real fairness, real dignity, lives in people's choices. And when those choices falter, someone has to stand up. That someone had been her. She'd walked into her own bank as a stranger and had been treated like a problem. Judged by her appearance, doubted in spite of her credentials, refused a simple withdrawal. And still, she didn't raise her voice. She didn't cause a scene. She let the truth do the talking. And when the truth finally came to light, when Todd and the others realized who she was, Danielle didn't retaliate in anger. She made a choice, a quiet, strong, clear choice to make sure it never happened again. Because this wasn't just about her. It was about everyone who didn't have a title to fall back on. Everyone who had been turned away, spoken down to, or ignored. Everyone who had walked into a place of business and left feeling small. After that day, Grace and Trust changed, and it changed for the better. But more than that, Danielle's story became something others could carry with them, a reminder that even the smallest moments of injustice matter. That silence can hurt just as much as words. That fairness is not something we inherit. It's something we practice every day with every person. This story isn't just about a bank or a CEO. It's about how we choose to treat one another when no one's watching. It reminds us that kindness isn't weakness, and standing up for what's right doesn't require shouting just courage. Sometimes justice looks like a quiet woman in sneakers holding her ground, refusing to shrink. And that kind of strength, it changes things. If this story touched something in you, if it reminded you of your own experience or someone you love, I'd be honored to hear about it. Feel free to share your thoughts or leave a comment. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, real human and told with care, I hope you'll consider following along. Not because you have to, but because sometimes it's good to be reminded that dignity still matters. Thank you for listening. Truly.